Joining me now is talkTV's international editor, Isabel Oakeshott. Thanks, Isabel. Is that somebody saying for the first time that there was harm created by the measures that were taken, perhaps? Good evening.
Well, I certainly thought that that was a significant acknowledgement from Rishi Sunak. No one else has done that.
No.
I think what he was getting at there was that the government, those responsible for the decision making, shouldn't just be apologising about the many people who died, many of whom died as a direct result of blunders by the government, but also to the millions of people that suffered grievously and are still suffering as a result of lockdowns. Now, he didn't spell that out. I'd like him to have. He didn't quite go that far, but I think that's what he was getting at. And, well, it's a start, isn't it?
Well, it's getting there, isn't it? Somebody finally acknowledging that there was harm created by something other than the actual COVID disease itself. And the WhatsApp conversation was interesting as well, because you've said to me before, I don't know why they're having such trouble getting hold of all these WhatsApps, so you just come and ask me for them. He doesn't seem to understand WhatsApp very well, Rishi Sunak. Let's just have a look what he said.
You don't now have access to any of the WhatsApps that you did send during the time of the crisis, do you?
No, I don't. I've changed my phone multiple times over the past few years, and as that has happened, the messages have not come across.
Around that time, April and May 2021, did nobody say to you, Chancellor, it's important that you do retain your WhatsApps, or we need to put into place measures for them to be backed up in case they become relevant to an inquiry?
No, I don't recall either of those conversations that you referred to between officials, but you might have been referring to officials in number 10 rather than the Treasury. No, yes, and I don't recall anyone in my office making that recommendation or observation to me at the time.
I mean, my first thought when I saw that was to think, well, hang on, you're in government, in a senior position in government, you're exchanging ideas and policy suggestions with colleagues in the cabinet, which at the very least should be reasonably secure. And nobody seems to be in charge of where any of these things go.
Well, the other thing that's a bit odd about it is when you change your phone, normally you just load up the app, again, using your original sign-ins for the app concerned, and you'll get all your records. Right. So I'm not sure that changing your phone necessarily means you lose all your data. Otherwise, no one would ever change their phone. They'd have to start again with every account they have. Right. But what I would say in defense of Rishi Sunak is that the WhatsApp messages that I've got between him and Matt Hancock seem to bear out what he said, which is that he's not a prolific WhatsApp user. Now, this might be in the case of his exchanges with the then Health Secretary that they weren't particularly close, which they weren't. You know, they weren't particularly good friends. Nonetheless, between them, Matt Hancock and Rishi Sunak were two of the four most important people in government on policy making over the pandemic. And actually, the file that I have for him is pretty sparing. It looks that he has always been rather cautious of putting things in writing, as the cleverest people probably are. And so it may be that his WhatsApps aren't actually that exciting, even if we could see all the other ones.
And he acquitted himself reasonably well. I mean, in some places, people said today that was probably the best place he could be, while his party was kind of ripping itself to shreds elsewhere. He just had to answer some questions from a KC who wasn't on particularly good form, I didn't think, today.
Well, he was a bit softer than usual, Hugo KC. I thought that Sunak gave a pretty solid performance. He put up a robust defence of the various measures that came in for criticism, most high-profile one being the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. And Hugo Keith, the KC, was forced to admit, really, that there was no compelling evidence that this much maligned scheme was responsible for anyone additional perishing as a result of COVID. There may have been a very slight correlation in an uptick in cases, but actually the inquiry barrister acknowledged that there's no causality there. And I think Sunak, in a sense, was impressive in his reluctance to criticise everyone else. You know, we've seen a number of other high-profile witnesses who have not hesitated to attack pretty much everyone other than their own record. And time and again, Sunak resisted that temptation. You know, he continually defended number 10 and Boris Johnson's operation. And given that there's no love lost between those two men, that was actually quite a generous thing for him to have done.
Yes. Isabel, thank you very much indeed.